everyone. Thank you all for joining our artist talk tonight. The first one we are hosting in English. My name is Ina Neddermeyer and I'm the head of the art department. And together with my colleagues, I'm curating the upcoming exhibition Beyond States on the boundaries of statehood that will probably open up on January 21st next year. And we have already started the digital prologue of our exhibition, the so-called debatorial that we launched on September 29th. It is an online platform that is reflecting the different topics of the exhibition and inviting the audience to participate in a discourse which we are hoping to establish. Within this topic, I'm very happy about this artist talk tonight. I'm very glad to welcome Daniel Keller and Jacob Hurwitz-Goodman. I'm very delighted to have this talk with you. Also, I want to say hello to my colleague, Dominic Bush, who hopefully will bring in many questions from our online community. So please don't hesitate to send us your questions and or comments in the debatorial chat on Facebook, YouTube, or in our Telegram group. Before I hand over to Daniel and Jacob, I would like to introduce the two artists. So Jacob Hurwitz-Goodman is originally from Detroit, USA, and now based in Los Angeles. He is a documentary, scripted and commercial filmmaker. And besides of that, he has directed several music videos. His films have appeared on NBC Left Field, Wired, Atlas Obscura, Discovery Digital, The Huffington Post, The New York Post, Al Jazeera, and so on. And I would also like to introduce Daniel Keller. He's also originally from Detroit and now based in Berlin. And his works engage at the intersection of economics, ecology, technology, and culture. He took part in various exhibitions at the Kunsthalle in Vienna, the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, the Ullin Center for Contemporary Art in Beijing, the ICA in London, and he participated in the third Moscow International Biennale for Young Art. And without further ado, I now hand over to Jacob and Daniel.
Hi, Daniel, you're muted.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to begin, we're going to show a clip from the movie. I'm not sure if everyone watching has seen it. It is online. It was originally commissioned by dis.art, but I have seen a leaked version on YouTube. So if you search for it, you'll be able to find it there as well.
But be careful that you don't accidentally find the other version, the alternate version created by the Seasteaders themselves with the same title.
Right, which they did in response. I don't know if you want to just play it first and then we can kind of tell you more about the project afterwards, but I think it will set the tone.
Yeah, so we chose a 2-minute clip that basically where the Seasteaders kind of explain their own mission from the film and the origins of it. So let me just share the screen.
I was on a cruise ship and I was fascinated that it was the highest standard of living I'd ever had. And one night on the cruise ship was cheaper than one night in a coastal hotel the night before. I also noticed various people from the developing world were working there, and they shared my sense that this was really exciting, like we're living better by being on this cruise ship. And I couldn't figure out how I could be living like a wealthy American and how they could be living like a middle-class waiter. And instead of enjoying myself, I was walking around doing back-of-the-napkin calculations, like, why does this work better than any city I've ever been in? Then about 6 weeks later, I was at my 10th Burning Man, where I met Patri Friedman.
It was at Burning Man where our founder, Patri Friedman, was wandering around when he came up with the idea for seasteading. Patri, the grandson of Nobel Prize economist Milton Friedman, mesmerized by the dynamism of a city that changed each year, where everybody's homes are tents and people could more easily choose who they associated with, imagined that on the sea, if all of our homes floated and we could sail between locations, we could more easily choose our associations and societies.
That would be variation by governments and selection by residents. Variation and selection is the secret recipe for progress. I'd just written a book about evolution. It's not you, it's biology, the science of love, sex, and relationships. And I'd come to understand how that's how progress happens. And I suddenly realized this is completely technologically doable, and this would, in principle, unleash, as Patri put it, a Cambrian explosion of governments. And I became addicted to that idea. I think one of the most important services in the world is governance, and it doesn't work well if we have monopolies over them. If we could have more choice, more proliferations, the ones that don't work go out of business, the ones that do work flourish. The only mechanism that matters is that people can choose among them. And whatever emerges will completely defy our ideologies and arguments now. I've been waiting 6 years for somebody to explain to me what's wrong with that idea, and I still haven't heard it. I really think this could work.
So that was a little bit choppy. I don't know if it was for everybody, but it was for me. But the audio worked fine, so that was good. Still get the idea, I guess. So yeah, a little bit of background. We made this film in 2017. The Seasteaders, this organization, they had a conference in Tahiti for a few days where they had reached a tentative agreement with the Tahitian government to build one of their first seasteads, this idea of a floating city-state that would have its own kind of innovative governance system. So I had contact through one of them through a tech conference that I had actually gone to at DLD, somebody who was really involved with Peter Thiel's business and politics. He kind of hooked us up with that, and we were kind of able to get access, kind of special access. There were no other documentary filmmakers there at the time. So we went there and we filmed it for a few days, for 4 days, I guess we were there. Jacob? Yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything to add?
No, yeah, I'd say that pretty much sums it up. It was for Daniel had a lot more background with the seasteading movement. He had been making work about them for several years, right? Probably like 5 or 10 years.
I'd been sort of fascinated with them for, I think, probably almost maybe 7 years before we made it, and never really participated in it, just sort of like looked at the imagery and read about it and kind of gawked at it and made fun of it a lot. And also in my work kind of, satirize it, because it always seemed like sort of this exemplary, an exemplary version of this Californian ideology, just in a like kind of illustrated into the most cartoonish way possible. And that's sort of what I've always been interested in interrogating in my work, that sort of culture very specifically. The Seasteading Institute, little background, it was, I think, founded in 2008, like we said in the video, by Patri Friedman along with somebody else. It very much is clearly inspired by Burning Man. It's really like Burning Man on the water in its most like idealized form, where you have little villages and you're allowed to go between the villages, and some of the villages suck and some of them are really cool for whatever reason. And it, of course, this is like the type of people that it really attracts. So I think there's it gets a lot of press because it's such a kind of sensational idea. And so I think it maybe gets more press than it deserves as far as how serious any of its attempts have gone. Although since we made the film, there have been some new steps in the progress that I think we'll talk about later. But yeah, it is highly associated with Peter Thiel, which is another reason why it has this mystique. I don't know if people know, but Peter Thiel was one of the founders of PayPal. He was the first outsider investor of Facebook, multi-billionaire. He's also one of the investors, the founders of Palantir, which is the notorious big data mining surveillance company. So he has his hand in a lot of sort of reactionary pots, reactionary or libertarian, depending on things. He was also one of the earliest supporters in Silicon Valley for Trump. And I think the Trump era.
He drove Gawker out of business too. So,
yes, he's the reason why Gawker doesn't exist. He sued them through Hulk Hogan, the wrestler, basically for outing him several years ago as being gay, and he seeked revenge on that. So he's in many ways just like, I think he would say he's for freedom, but I think he attacks freedom in a lot of ways too. So in general, I think with seasteading, it brings up a lot of interesting points, and I don't think there's necessarily easy answers to it. I think personally, I think maybe Jake and I have different levels of tolerance for that ideology. I think there's something to be said for localism and for the sort of how untenable large nation states, especially America at this point, seem to be, considering the sort of splintering ideologies that seem really fundamental at this point. But there's very good reasons for, I think, why it's a bad idea. So, maybe we can get to that in the debate section. But yeah, so it's associated with Peter Thiel, but he actually kind of stepped away. I don't think he takes it very seriously at this point, but they get a lot more credibility because early on, he was one of the early donators. He donated, I think, $1 million, which is a lot in a way, but is, it's barely enough for PR for 10 years, let alone building one of these things. So it's always been really janky. It's like any of the sort of progress towards it has never been close to the sort of renderings that very much is the aesthetic of seasteading, much more than whatever it would end up looking like, which I guess is like a rusty cruise ship, much more than like a gleaming pod, because that's what the sea is. And that's one of the main, I think, like the main fundamental absurd things about seasteading is that it's primarily driven by ideology and wanting to experiment with like libertarian governance, but it's just this completely absurd fusion with like how to build things on the sea, which is a very diverse, very different problem to solve. And it's yet to be proven that combining those things at once is going to make either of those things easier to do. So it's always a little bit of this absurd thing. And yeah, I think there's a lot of questions as far as colonialism that are just, I think they aren't really aware of themselves because they have sort of no background in liberal arts or art or kind of any aesthetics. It's very much this sort of, techno brain way of looking at things that drives the whole thing. So yeah, I don't know, but
I think one of the things that I learned making this film was about the Californian Ideology, which is an article that I think came out in the early 90s in Mute magazine. Is that right, Daniel? You're the one who pointed me towards it.
Yeah, it was a British professor named Richard Barbrook, who is a sort of Marxist. I met him once in London. He wears like ska clothes, but he's like a boomer Marxist. But I think it's one of the most seminal essays written in the 90s about that defines what this is all about.
Yeah, I feel like that could, I've a lot of people who've approached me about the film to ask questions about it and talk about it had never heard of that article before, even though they were very hooked on the concepts in the documentary. So I don't know, maybe it's worth just very briefly summarizing what the Californian Ideology is.
Well, if you want to, go ahead. I have a few thoughts about it, but
yeah, it was please stop me if I'm sort of mischaracterizing it, but I think the idea is that it's the fusion of libertarian economics with kind of hippie social values, basically, that was tested and proven to be effective in Northern California starting in the late 80s, early 90s. And that's what the culture of Silicon Valley and techno virtual utopianism sort of was born in that space. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it kind of emerged out of this whole Earth catalog culture of the late 60s, the sort of hippie thing, and just sort of like what happened with boomers at large. They became neoliberals sometime in the late 70s and 80s. And I think it's like a very important thing now, especially with Kamala Harris as the VP. Her brother-in-law is actually the chief counsel at Uber. She was a district attorney in San Francisco and in California, was attorney general of California before. I mean, I think that this is sort of like this election was a referendum on if California ideology is going to be the dominant ideology in America right now. And I think that's like pretty much proven to be. So there is liberal social values combined with, pure neoliberal economics, and I think probably, neoconservative foreign interventionism. So, and I think the fact that I think this is sort of related to that, but I think there's not really the same social liberal values that I don't think that's necessarily key to seasteading in the same way as the California ideology is. So there's definitely
Although Burning Man really takes the aesthetics of the hippie sort of hippie social values and literalizes it in a way out in the desert. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, but then there's even a bit of I think there's more of a reactionary streak to seasteading even more than with Burning Man. That's sort of my own personal take on it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe I can just a little background about what happened just in Tahiti. So they had reached this sort of tentative agreement with the government that they'd be able to build their first seastead in just a couple kilometers, or maybe even only a few hundred meters offshore, in the sort of within the atoll, so within very calm waters, within the territorial waters of Tahiti, which is technically part of France. So it was even a little bit more unlikely that it could ever have happened, because it would have had to been a special law passed in France that something like this could happen. The idea was that it would be a special economic zone, sort of like Shenzhen or any of these other examples, but it would be technically part of the EU. The government there was a sort of pro-France liberal government at the time. I think pretty corrupt, very linked in with the sort of like vanilla business, which is one of the prime things, and the pearl business, which is the other main business in Tahiti. I think it was a little bit of a cash grab on their front. I think that they just thought this was a bit of an opportunity to get some money from Californians. So I think also just because this was the first year of the Trump administration, the crypto market was just starting to boom. There was this sort of like, I think it was like a magical time for these types of people, where the possibilities for new types of political movements seemed a lot more open, I think, than they even do now. Although definitely that opened up the Overton window, and it's still open. What happened is then, I'm not sure what happened after exactly the documentary, but once we filmed it and it was released almost a full year later, about 10 months later, shortly after that was released, there was an election in Tahiti where that government basically, it got a lot of protests by local groups that lived near where it was going to be constructed that were very much against it. And it became a sort of just political liability. So the government just sort of pretended that it was never serious in the first place and said the document we signed was never actually legally binding, and it just died, basically. I think that they partially blamed us for that, but that's unrealistic. I don't think enough people in Tahiti saw it for us to have made any impact at all. But they were very, very angry with the way that they were depicted in the end. Even though there was no editorializing, it was literally just, them in their own words. But I guess they weren't used to seeing it edited in a way that wasn't just a PR puff piece. So they were really freaking out about it in the end. And we had a lot of email back and forth and stuff. And they were kind of convinced that this was a project ending film for them. And yeah, I don't know, Jacob, if you want to go into it, because this was sort of your angle or your
Yeah, we got a lot of pushback from them, right? Because we reached out to them and showed them several cuts of the film before it was released. This was part of the deal that we made with them. They asked for editorial input, and of course we said no. That's not something I ever give to someone I'm working on a documentary with, but something I do usually offer people, especially if they're in a public position like the Seasteaders are, is that they can have our footage and do whatever they want with the footage. So, and that they could watch cuts and give feedback, but it would have no kind of like editorial power. So their feedback was, this is terrible for us. We all hate it. We said, I'm sorry, we're not going to change it. And then what they ended up doing was using our footage and actually using the template of the trailer that we had cut together for the film to cut their own alternative version and release it with the same title online at the same time that that dis.art released ours. so that so that our search engine optimization was, I guess their idea was that it would kind of undermine our SEO and that people looking for our film would find theirs instead. And it was kind of this funny congruence, which I thought was amazing because, of course, editing is editorialism. And it was a really interesting experiment in looking at sort of two different viewpoints using the same footage. So.
Right. And it was really, I think, illuminating the types of things that they objected to in the language that we used in the trailer and the way that I wish we actually, do you have that available actually, those files, the two trailers? We could show that too.
Yeah, let's see. I haven't downloaded it, but I have it on Google Drive, so I could try if you want to.
Sure, I'll keep talking
for a second.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was, of course, like a kind of a nice climax for us because, we release a film, some people see it, you want something to happen. And this was at least some like kind of some action. I think that their fears were unwarranted. A lot of people who watched the film, they ask us like, did they pay you to make this? And they really don't see the critical side of it at all. Which is bizarre to me because I do think like, if you have a critical mind at all, it's like very clear that we're, not in favor of a lot of the things that they're saying. And we're highlighting the problematic stuff that they sort of are kind of clueless about. But there's sort of still, I think we tried to make it really neutral. We didn't want to put too much editorializing in it. And I think that's sort of the effect is some people think it's, a complete satire and some people think it's, an infomercial. And that was really interesting to kind of experience. And so then since then, there was the first actual attempt at seasteading was there is this one Bitcoin millionaire, early Bitcoin investor, big libertarian who is he was not involved in the Seasteading Institute governance or the executive body, whatever, but he was like a big fanboy. And he and his Thai wife, I guess, made this very like sort of, it looks like a yurt or like a little igloo that was just on a single spur floating off the coast of Thailand. And there was a huge controversy because the Thai Navy decided that this was an act of treason. They got arrested. There was talk of the death penalty at some point. As far as I know, they got out. I don't know if they just bought their way out or what, but he's fine. And actually, this guy was at the conference in Tahiti, and I think he is in some of the shots in the background, but we didn't get a chance to talk to him.
Wait, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was there. Yeah. And so that happened. And then since then, in the last year or two, this guy bought a cruise ship, which is bizarrely, I guess, designed by Renzo Piano, even though it does not look very nice or designed, which he's renamed the SS Satoshi after the pseudonym of the founder of Bitcoin. And it's a crypto cruise ship, although it's not a cruise ship because it's just going to be anchored off the coast of Panama, which is a notorious tax haven. Of course, their Panama Papers, it's been known for that. It is also, an American colony. It is also, the center of global commerce. So it is a really interesting place for this to happen. And I don't know if they made a special agreement with the Panama government or if it was just sort of is legal there because ships can be anchored off the coast. But anyways, the idea is to sell off the cabins as condos, which is happening right now. There's an auction, which I'll show you the website of in a second. And you can buy these condos for around, I think, starting at $35,000. And in theory, then you can just live and work on this cruise ship. It'll be a techno innovation hub, whatever that means. There'll be a casino, there'll be a gym. I read more about it. There aren't kitchens.
No kitchens.
You'll have to eat cruise food, but residents get a 20% discount. So I guess it's going to be Mensa food, but I don't know. All year round. I'll show you it. And they rebranded as Ocean Builders. I think that they were too their reputation was too tarnished by Tahiti. So they rebranded and they're offering all this stuff for sale. There's a web shop, but it's complete vaporware. None of it has been built. Although the cruise ship, I guess, has been built and is in theory going to start being, the auction ends in 2 weeks and people are going to be able to start moving in early next year. It seems hilarious that they're doing that right now during a pandemic. I also looked up the cruise ship, the the history of it, like the bad things that happened on it. In 2009, there was a swine flu outbreak on this very ship where I think 80% of the people got sick. So that, of course, is a real issue with seasteading in general. Great reminder of that. But yeah, let me just share my screen and I'll show you what this website looks like, because it's pretty funny in my opinion.
They are so incredibly persistent. That's like one of the most admirable things. They will not give up this dream
that's
to
true.
live on the sea.
That's true. They're such a joke, and they just power on. So yeah, I don't know. Can you see the website? I can't. Is it sharing? Okay, cool. So yeah, there's the Sea Pod, which is your new home. Okay, no, there's the crypto cruise ship, and this design. I mean, it looks so much like post-internet art from 7 years ago. It's just hilarious to me. There's a land-based pod that came out of left field for me. I don't know what the logic is of that. And also a land-based pod, I think, is like a tree house or just a house. I don't know what a sea plot is. This is interesting to me. I guess it's just about staking out territory and you can park your boat there. Then this is almost for sure illegal. They're just offering shares, but it's not like you're not allowed to just sell shares of your company online. Like that's against the rules. And they're just selling them in $10,000 segments, which I just really don't understand at all. There's this kind of graphic, which is, I mean, it's great, I guess. And then, so you can reserve them now and it takes you to a web shop, I guess. Wait, it's not working now. So yeah, you just put in your billing details. Oh, here, I accidentally ordered 3 sea pods for $585,000. You can use PayPal. You can use any major credit card. You can also use Bitcoin and Litecoin or other altcoins. So I don't understand. Like I can't imagine that they've sold a single thing through this interface. I don't know why they bothered to have it other than to make it seem like it's real. It's just so delusional. So this is the cruise ship. I guess the Renzo piano part, the trademark part, is the bulbous top, which is supposed to look like a dolphin head. The rest of it just looks like a cruise ship to me. So you can just go to the auction page. Okay, so everything. Also, all the businesses you can pay with Bitcoin, which is, I guess, means you have to wait 5 minutes for all of your payments to go through. You can get these ocean view rooms starting at, I think, $30,000. Okay, $69,000. That's the buy now price. So yeah, and this is going on now. As far as I know, you don't need to prove any credentials or anything. You can just, if you want to buy it, you can have it. And I mean, if anyone wants to get a big pot together and buy one, talk to me afterwards, because I think it would be really hilarious to have one. Yeah. So anyway, that's sort of, I think, the vibe, and the fact that they're just still going for it, just shamelessly. I mean, great. I don't know.
It's amazing. I have the 2 sort of battling trailers queued up.
Oh, cool. Okay. Let's watch. Oh, so here's Chad Elwertowski. He's the treasonous Thai man, or treasonous.
Also from Michigan, just like us.
Right. Also like us, and also like Randy, who was the president of Blue Frontiers, who was our personal contact. He's from a very similar area and background as us. So that's partially how we, I think, made some rapport.
I do recognize him.
Yeah, I remember him. He's definitely, is he the guy actually with the stroller? No, that's somebody else.
Okay, so I don't know. Ina, I don't know how much time we have left. I can show these 2 trailers.
Yeah, I think do that. Yeah,
that would be great. The trailer, and we open up the discussion.
Okay, cool. I hope these aren't as choppy as last time. I have no way of knowing because the last one looked totally smooth on my end, but here's hoping. So, I'm just going to play them back to back. The first one that I'm playing is the one we made.
Don't tell them which one is which.
Too late. The cat's out of the bag. The first one is the one we made. The second one is the one that was released like a day later by the Seasteaders.
Called the Seasteaders, called the same.
Also called the Seasteaders, yeah. Right. They're both trailers for films that also exist separately.
And they did come out with a documentary series, but it's not actually using much of our footage. It's very
They
unrelated.
did actually use quite a bit of our footage. I watched it recently, and Daniel, I don't know if we had talked about this, but they used a shot of you in their documentary.
Oh, I think maybe
you.
I remember that actually.
Yeah.
I see. Well, I'm made complicit, I guess. Okay.
Okay. Here we go. So this one is ours.
Seasteaders dreamed of a magical place that would fulfill all of our requirements. And where could we possibly find a place like this? We searched for years.
It was at Burning Man where our founder, Patrick Friedman, was wandering around when he came up with the idea for seasteading.
Seasteading is the technology to vote with your house. And this would, in principle, unleash a Cambrian explosion of governments.
I'm a libertarian, and for my entire life, I've wanted to save the world.
I'm from the United States. Americans agree on nothing. The one thing we do agree on is that the current system is not working, and nobody is happy.
The basic democratic system, I don't think, is very effective.
Steve Wozniak did not change Hewlett-Packard from the inside. You want to talk about a new world? This is the undiscovered continent. We can't do it without you. You are our hosts. Marugu Roa.
Okay, so that was obviously our trailer. Oh, and then here, the Zoom thing is blocking me. There we go. Here is their trailer. Magical place that would fulfill all of our requirements. And where could we possibly find a place like this? We searched for years.
Time and time again, we've been told that the Polynesians are the original seasteaders. We're confident that we have a lot that we can learn from you, and a lot we can learn from each other.
So I think in 2025, by then, we should have something beautiful, unprecedented in the world.
I saw in seasteading an opportunity to create systems where people could live in harmony together.
But for me, I see the promise of seasteading as being the most interesting thing. It's sort of a knowledge collection thing for me. I like that aspect of seasteading.
I don't believe in like a universal system for everyone in that way. Like everyone's gonna have a system that's probably better for them.
We can't do it without you. You are our hosts. Maru Roha.
So yeah, that's that. They even found the same font that I like to use.
I mean, there was a lot of attention to detail. And of course, they had to find the exact same shots to redo the text overlay on that. So,
yeah.
And yeah, actually, I haven't watched those two side by side in a while. And it is really interesting to see. They were really upset because they thought that they had a lot more interaction with the local people than I think we saw them having, I guess. So I think that was a big difference. Yeah, we didn't get to talk to any Tahitian locals. They didn't actually introduce us to any, though. We were most of the time on a tour bus, being on this sort of guided tour around the island with these people. And of course, we were more interested in, the motivations of the Seasteaders themselves and not necessarily other perspectives as much.
But we did end up kind of trying to solve for that by including the voice of a particular Tahitian radio host,
right? Who was very critical of it, but in a really, I think, succinct way that was a fair critique, and
a bit more interesting than an interview would have been, because he was speaking directly to the grassroots movement that was resisting the Seasteaders. So right. I think, it was a lot more.
And he had that radio voice, the perfect,
French perfect radio voice. Yeah.
Yay. Thank you very much for this great introduction. And it's also quite interesting to see both trailers together and to compare them. And I think we have a lot of questions, and Dominic has also one question from the community.
Well, yes, that's right. And Daniel, you said in the very in the very beginning that when you were talking about the guys who actually who founded the Seasteading Institute, you said the art background, the aesthetics is lacking, and all of them are like tech guys. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, of course, right?
Yeah.
But what do you mean of that by that? Because one of the first questions that we received is the Seasteading Institute a real thing, or is it an art project, like a mockumentary, right? So it's right. Because it seems so absurd. And now you clarified that it's a real thing, it's a real attempt. But what is that art background that you've been talking about?
Oh, I made art about seasteading myself. I made, back in 2013, I did a show called Lazy Ocean Drift, which was actually about a lot of the same themes in Beyond States, sort of about liquidity and offshore platforms and, this sort of the general, I think this is sort of like such an established bit of discourse. We also showed this film in an exhibition in Croatia this summer, which was also kind of about liquidity and international finance. But anyway, yes. So I was making work about it. And at first I thought of it as just like a satirical art piece. It seemed like that to me. But then because it was connected to Peter Thiel and Milton Friedman's grandson, it was this real thing. And for me, that was just really, really, hilarious, I guess. It was mostly fascinating, but it was always a bit of a humor thing for me to begin with.
Okay.
Yes, and as our exhibition is focusing on states and the boundaries of states, I would like to know, what would you say is the role of the state in the Seasteaders' perspective? And what would be their kind of perfect state? What would it look like?
From what they told us, I think the perfect state would be floating on the water, and it would be one that, I mean, they all have there is kind of a slight diversity of opinion within the group about what the perfect state would look like. That's kind of the point, is that they get to all go out and experiment with different kinds of states. But I think the most important aspect of it is that it would be easy to exit a state. That's their ideal category, is you can leave if you don't like it, sort of like how you can go to McDonald's if you don't like Burger King. So Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's a really seminal essay from the late 60s, or a book actually, called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. And it's sort of about the options that, it's sort of in terms of consumer goods, but the options that someone has if there's a degrading quality of services. You can exit, or you can have voice to try to reform it from the inside. The Seasteader idea of statehood is all exit, no voice. So there's an idea from Mencius Moldbug, who is a neo-reactionary blogger, Curtis Yarvin. He wrote an essay called The Patchwork. And this is sort of the thought experiment of all exit, no voice taken to the extreme, where there'd be tons of different microstates with various legal systems or social systems. And in theory, none of them would be democratic states. They would have encoded constitutions that are unchangeable, and you'd be able to once a year move between the states or something like that. That's the sort of the idea. So I think that's the idea. And they have this this analogy of the Cambrian explosion, and they use a lot of this language of evolutionary biology and stuff. So there's, this sort of, competition is the key state is that there's lots of different competitor states that are sort of innovating governance, and that, but I think most of them are, libertarians or almost full-on anarchists, right libertarians more than left libertarians, although there's a bit of diversity there. So I think that they would be fine with there being some seasteads that are, Marxist or whatever, but that they think that those would fail and that people would want to go to the libertarian ones because that's logical. So
yeah, none of them would want to go to that seastead, but they think it should maybe exist.
Right.
And in this context, should we also rethink citizenship? Because it doesn't work like the normal traditional citizenship that is connected to a country. And do we have to think about fluid citizenship, flexible citizenship? What would you say?
I think that we need to think about those things for sure. They seem more, it is funny with this Beyond States and with this other show, I think there's a lot of assumptions about the sort of inevitability of globalization and this increasing fluidity and, frictionless travel and immigration and stuff. And that is so the opposite of what's happened this year where, I can't visit my family. Even though, I guess in theory I can, although my girlfriend can't come with me, we've never, in our lifetimes experienced this, type of, how much citizenship matters these days. And also just, the fact that Germans are going to get all the first doses of the vaccine. I'm not complaining personally. I really want the vaccine, but that's, citizenship is more important than ever. And I think the sort of dreams of international cooperation seem unfortunately very, very distant right now.
And you said that there is a kind of a colonial undertone when talking about seasteaders. And at first glance, you could say that the future of humanity is at sea because we have these climate changes, we have to face enormous environmental problems. Would you say that seasteaders are dealing in a serious way with these environmental problems, or is it just a new way of colonization, exploiting nature and extending civilization?
I would say it depends on which one you speak with. There are some of them who I think are very serious about the environmental questions, but the overriding concern that I picked up was a kind of distaste for taxes, I think, is above and beyond the environmental
and for the
concern.
Federal government in general, and sort of having their rule being imposed on you. I think that's...
Yeah, it felt a little bit more like the environmental concerns were a PR move to get the Tahitian government to agree to what they were doing. Yeah.
Although there are, islands that are literally going to have to float if they're going to survive. And I do think, I know the architect Bjarke Engels, who half of the stuff he makes is, crazy utopian dreams. And then he also makes skyscrapers for petro dictators, I guess. But I know that UN and the UN commissioned him to make a sort of seastead model that was specifically about mitigating climate change. So I do think that is a valid concern. I don't think we're going to have a water world, but probably more of that. I don't really think that in its purest form, it is not colonial in the same way. You're not displacing any people. You're actually not really exploiting any new resources. It would be basically importing all of the goods it needs to survive, other than, I guess, some type of, local agriculture, seaweed, kelp farming or something like that. But building is going to a literal European colony and then building a tiny colony off the coast of that colony, that is very clearly colonial. And I think they were not aware of that. And also just the way that they interacted with the Tahitian people was gross. I mean, it was just kind of gross to witness. The president actually invited all of us to go to this banquet at the presidential palace. And even the architecture of the palace there, it looks like this colonial style, like 19th century colonial style, but it was built in 2000. So it's really like, it's just the legacy of this place there. And they had these hula dancers, and then they had these like overweight American guys dancing with them. And it was just was, the exact, like, yeah. It was also how the Tahitians presented themselves, but that was, yeah.
And calling Tahiti the undiscovered continent, which was part of Joe Quirk's speech. Joe Quirk is he's the one who wrote the book on seasteading. He gave this speech where he called it the undiscovered continent. He said that he referred to themselves as pioneers over and over again, which is remarkably blind to the current discourse around anti-colonialization and colonial history, especially even within the United States, especially. But he's from the United States, so to have that language and then to go to another place and use that language it struck me, and we put this in the film as being very, very strange.
Well, yes, yeah. I think they live in such an ideological bubble that I think they were just sort of even surprised that people had that reaction. So
maybe I can drop in another question, because talking about Joe Quirk, when I discovered his book and read the subtitle to his book, it's How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Liberate Humanity from Politicians. It's it solves everything, every big problem there is in the world, basically. But yes, it also sounds like a written toolbox to a state's coup, to a putsch, right? So it's not only colonial; it's basically, suggested anti-democratic.
Right. I think that's I think this is brings up a really interesting debate about how many people, if you have a right to exit from the nation state, is that inherently anti-democratic? Is everyone obligated to participate in a system that they don't agree with? I don't know. I think these are really valid questions that I don't think there is necessarily a very simple answer for. I am very skeptical of their motivations and the kind of society that they would build. That's for sure. But
I think we were catching them in sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
We were catching them in a really interesting moment where they were not enacting the pure form of seasteading where they go out into international waters. They were imposing their ideology on an existing state, and they were requesting special status to not pay taxes to the French Polynesian government, but to use their resources to have the defense of their navy in case they were attacked by pirates or something like that. So there is, and obviously they would be outside of the political system. So there was, at least in this iteration, something very anti-democratic about
Absolutely,
it. Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, and inherent, directly parasitic, basically. I think because they think they're going to cure the sick and liberate the poor, that they should be happy to have them there innovating. I don't know what exactly, different startups. I mean, that's basically I think that's the limit of their imagination of what innovation looks like for the most part. But yeah, that's the idea, is just that it would attract the right type of mix of people that would just make this sort of magical innovation sauce or whatever.
And when you're talking about somebody like Peter Thiel wanting to divest all of his, not all, but much of his own money and the money of the people that are in his close circle and the people who are involved with seasteading, they have been acquiring resources from within the infrastructure of the United States or whatever country they live in, and then taking it and offshoring it. This might be where me and Daniel disagree a little bit, but I do think that there is something inherently kind of very problematic and immoral about wanting to exit a society that you've benefited so much from, and to kind of just because you don't want to share your resources with those who you disagree with or those who are less fortunate.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think on a conceptual level, maybe that's true, but I definitely think that like tax evasion and the offshore finance system is one of the main problems in the world today. Like, I think it is actually one of the most evil things possible. And I think it is really notable that a lot of these sort of, nationalist, I mean, Peter Thiel is in a way, I mean, he was in favor of sort of Trump. So he is also a nationalist, but he got a New Zealand citizenship a few years ago. Nigel Farage got an American citizenship recently. So I do think that it's quite interesting that the people who are most into secessionism definitely do not have any kind of like specific loyalty to their own countries. I mean, Peter Thiel was born in Germany. That's also true. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think these contradictions are really interesting. Like you said, Jacob, like it's all about saving taxes. And so you could say like rich Americans, they try to abolish the national state just to save taxes. But on the other hand, it's like quite interesting because they're talking about new governance models, new forms of communities and freedom to choose and so on. So I think these contradictions are kind of interesting that they're into this project. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to whether or not like consumer choice is freedom, and they're trying to make governance into this sort of consumer choice where there's a marketplace for governance and there's these competing states in a way that just seems like a dialectic, but I don't think they would use those terms.
Yeah, I think, and probably one of the things that's most interesting about this, for me, one of the things that attracted me to want to work on this with Daniel is that it's not just a spectacle. And it's also not purely evil. It's something that there are kernels of truth that are these unsolvable contradictions within it that ask questions about our own society that make it a lot more interesting than just like looking at, making a documentary about a group that you just purely loathe. I think that they do bring up interesting questions for sure.
Yeah.
Dominic, is there a question from the community?
I would have one question to ask. Yes, it's a more complicated one, I guess. But Patrick Friedman, who you also showed in the short clip of the Seasteaders, he was interviewed by a German newspaper, and I'm again paraphrasing, but he said, if you imagine a government as part of an industry, you'll realize there is no competition, only extremely long contracts. Right? So that's paraphrased, of course, but paralyzing a state, a government with an industry, and let's say an LLC, which is in Germany, eine GmbH, right? This conspiracy theory that is that got attention recently, like many others, die Reichsbürger, they so-called, they portray Germany and the German government as an LLC. And so I was thinking, is Friedman kind of feeding off, or is he feeding to conspiracists? And may those guys be his target group?
Yeah, I mean, I think Reichsbürgers are very interesting right now. And there's, of course, an equivalent in America called sovereign citizens, which is, I guess, basically the same. It's the same term, more or less. So yes, that's definitely probably one side of it. But he's a smart guy. I don't think he's necessarily just like a paranoid conspiracy theory guy. I'm not sure if I directly connect those things so much, but definitely an interesting thing to have sort of fantasies about having a different citizenship than you actually do. Yeah, I mean, definitely relevant. But.
I do think that there are spiritual, I don't know if I agree. It doesn't seem like there's a direct connection between the Seasteaders and conspiracism, but there's spiritual connections. I mean, conspiracism is exiting the world of mainstream consensus and the world of sort of public discourse to form your own private reality, right? I think that it's not a coincidence that we're seeing both movements like the Seasteaders and a sort of like skyrocketing conspiracy theories all happening at the same time. And what connects those, I wouldn't be able to say. But yeah, I do think that they're connected.
I mean, I do think that, what connects them is the information fragmentation that we're all under. So that is reached to this point that is so extreme that, people occupy very different types of, ontologies, if not realities. So I think yes, that's the connection for sure. And I think because of that, these types of ideas become more appealing to more people. And I can understand because, it seems like really hard to occupy a country with 30% of them believing in QAnon. Like that seems like almost an ungovernable country at a certain point, where you'll never be able to have a leader that is actually legitimate for the majority of people. It's going to be this tyranny of the 51% or the tyranny of the 47% or whatever in the, in the case of Trump right now. So I don't know. It's a hard one. And I'm glad that you're, asking these questions and having an exhibition about this, because we do need to be thinking about this for sure.
And one last question might be, what is the future of seasteading? We have seen in the beginning, during your lecture, where you presented this crypto cruise ship and like these seaports. So what might be the future of seasteading? Because we see all these beginnings and then they end and then they restart in Panama or whatever. So what is the future of the seasteading?
I mean, if they manage to get a group of people to live even on a cruise ship for 6 months straight, that's going to be much bigger progress than anything they've done before. The only thing that they've done that's close to seasteading is they have a festival called Ephemeral every summer, where it's a bunch of rafts that connect to each other in this river near San Francisco. They have like a Burning Man festival. So this is, I guess, big progress. Although at the same time, looking at the renderings that you see, this is sort of like, the meme of like how it started, where we are now. It's like very diminished expectations of what a seastead would be like. But if they do this and it is, habitable, if people actually manage to live there, then who knows? I don't know. Then maybe it is at all possible. But I don't think it's ever it's gonna be a long time before anything like that happens, if ever. The other thing is that they are trying to do this on land too. Patry has a thing called pronomos capital, which is basically just trying to buy land from a government to make a special economic zone. So I think we're going to definitely see things like that, which are more straight up colonial, without any real questions. So we're going to see that because that's much more practical. Then you don't have to solve the issues of like having a floating platform at the same time. So there'll be a mix of these things. But I do think that it's going to accelerate probably.
I would be really interested to know what their relationship and discussions have been like with the Panama government. There's not much information out there about that. But
that was the other thing, was we were hoping to have a relationship with them that we would be able to follow their progress. But because they reacted so negatively to the documentary, we basically had to burn the bridge, because otherwise we would have had to edit or not even release the film. They were trying to get us to not release it. And they were going to give us $2,000 or something. What was it? So that we could then,
they
tried to pay.
I forgot about that. They tried to pay us not to release it.
Anyway, so, so thanks for having us. It was nice to talk about this again, because it's been a while, and Jacob and I haven't actually had a chat in a while face to face. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much for this amazing talk. I mean, we could have talked much longer about all these different aspects. So thank you very much, and thanks to the online audience. I would like to invite you to our upcoming event next Thursday on November 19th. Dominic Busch is going to talk to Miro Dietrich about so-called conspiracy theories and their entanglement with social media. So you are all warmly invited, and thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.